I'm Reverend Natasha Eckholm here at Center for Spiritual Living, and it is my joy and pleasure to welcome you this morning to our Sunday service, which will be an opportunity to think about what our expectations are and how we can lean into growing new ones and not being stuck in the old ones. And I'm getting a great opportunity this morning because, as Leslie said, it's a great day for good things, which means that all the technical glitches, all the every slightly off things that it seemed to happen, is the divine having a little fun with me. Hopefully not all of you too much, but with me for sure this morning. And, you know, I'm grateful because it's giving me the opportunity to actually walk my talk. And that's often something that, you know, as ministers, you know, we want to walk our talk. We're always talking to other people, right, about walking their talk. And boy, it's a little disconcerting when you get to do it right in front of a whole lot of people. So I appreciate your presence and your patience with me. So our talk this morning is called, I am calling Wholeness is All There Is. And as you all know, this year we have a theme called A Grand Rising, which is the idea of Centers for Spiritual Living. All of us who follow the philosophy of science of mind really being open to growth and to growing together, right? That is the rising for all of us. And we have monthly themes, and this month the theme has been unstatus quo. Like, what does that mean? It's kind of a funny phrase, right? So we know that status quo is the way things are, the way that we expect things to be. So unstatus quo, the idea that maybe there is something good about shaking up that status quo or looking at it or thinking about what that means. So we expect a certain status quo, right, in our daily life or even in our spiritual community. We tend to know what to wear, who will see, the topics that we are going to talk about, the type of music we're going to have, even the kind of treatment, right? And when we only operate in the world, go back please, Martin, in the world of expectations, sometimes we miss what is not the so-called norm. And we miss out on the beauty and richness of a greater experience. And I will explain that photograph in just a minute. And what we forget about sometimes is that there are a lot of topics that we kind of avoid, often in our spiritual communities, because maybe we think they're inappropriate or they're going to make us feel uncomfortable. And we kind of sometimes do that just out in life in general. But what we don't always think about is that if we don't talk about those topics in our communities, that we are isolating people for whom those topics are really, really important. And I'm talking about everything from gender identity, marginalization, trauma, substance use disorders, disabilities, addiction, sort of all of the topics that are difficult to deal with and make people uncomfortable. And we often don't talk about that in our centers. But we're talking about those subjects this week. Reverend Jerry talked about trauma. Reverend Suzette talked about shame last week, and we're going to talk about disability and wholeness, but not to label people as being disabled, but simply to recognize that that is a dimension of human experience, that being differently abled, being disabled. It's hard to talk about this without falling into the binary, right? Without falling into the whole and broken, the abled versus disabled. I've struggled a little in thinking about this weekend. I wondered if differently abled was a better way to talk about it. But when I looked into that, I found that there are a number of people in that community who don't like that term because they feel that it's condescending. So the term that was presented in most of the things that I looked at is persons with disabilities. So lead with the person, right? So not disabled person, where the emphasis is on disabled, but person with disabilities. Okay, so we're going to start there. And now that brings me to this photograph. So for those of you, how many people recognize this today, most of you. All right, so for those of us who were watching the Democratic National Convention this week, on Wednesday night, Tim Walz, who is the nominee for vice president, accepted his nomination, and his son Gus, and that's who this photograph is of, stood up during Tim Walz's speech and wept and gestured towards his father. It was very moving and very beautiful to me, and in fact it brought me to tears when I watched it. And shortly after that evening's program was over, a number of commentators began to make fun of Gus Walz for his expression of emotion, which they felt was somehow inappropriate. Now, for bigger context, Gus Walz is 17 years old, and he has a nonverbal neurodivergent condition. And he expresses himself emotionally. And there was quite a debate on social media and media in general this week about the fact that he was the fact that he was on camera, that he was expressing himself, about all the criticism that followed, and then the backlash against that criticism. And I thought it was really a very powerful moment for us collectively as a nation, right? Because in that context, there was somehow the perception that to behave differently was wrong, right? And so he was being labeled as having something wrong with him. And for us, this is an invitation to think about this in a new way, right? In our teaching, because we focus on everyone's inherent divine wholeness, right? We are called to embrace that wholeness, including anything that makes us uncomfortable, because we recognize that as part of the gift that each person is born with. And I'm not going to get into sort of the challenges of that. Obviously, for some people, those challenges are very difficult. And we'll talk a little bit more about what our role might be in addressing that. But I wanted to honor Gus Walz this morning, to honor his love for his father, his willingness to express it in front of all those people, right? That was a beautiful thing. All right. So, as you all know, I always like to focus on our principles and what principle is most relevant for this week's topic. And for me, that is this one. We believe in the individualization of the Spirit in us, and that all people are individualizations of the one Spirit. And what that means is that we are all divine, and we are all together in our oneness. We are all together in our wholeness, whatever the external appearance may be, right? And every person in this room and elsewhere who is joining us looks different, right? And some of them look different. We all look different in our bodies. We all look different in our experiences. We all look different in our circumstances. And yet, what we affirm is that we are all one Spirit together, right? So, in that context, those physical differences, whether they are perceived as limitations or challenges, really don't matter from a spiritual standpoint. We are still together, one Spirit. Those, whether we have mental or emotional differences, those also don't matter to Spirit. What matters to Spirit is how we live with them individually and together. Because that individual journey, part of that individual journey, is learning to see ourselves as whole, right? That's part of that sort of weird challenge of this human life. We wake up and we don't know who we are. And it is our life journey to discover our spiritual essence and the truth of who we are. And that also means discovering the truth of who everybody else is, which is that they are exactly like us, expressions of the divine, right? Ernest Holmes' teachings consistently throughout emphasize that every person without exception is an individualization of God, and that means that their essential spiritual essence is always unchanged, regardless of circumstances. It is always whole and complete, and that any physical or mental conditions do not define a person's worth or their spiritual potential. Our job is to discover our own unique gifts and talents and to support each other in discovering their unique gifts and talents so that we together, right, have that grand rising together. So we affirm that every person has the potential to live a fulfilling and meaningful life, right? Expressing their wholeness and contributing their unique essence to the world. So Eric Butterworth, a Unity minister, wrote, "You are a perfect idea in infinite mind. You are whole now. This wholeness is the only way the universe knows you." Right? So regardless of how you may be thinking about yourself, and has anyone here ever thought of themselves as somehow less than or broken or needing something more? Yeah, I think most of us have those moments. And for many of us, that's kind of part of how we grow up, isn't it? Sort of we are offered models to strive for. If we don't meet whatever those models represent to our families or to our communities, we are left feeling like there might be something wrong with us, right? We are somehow not measuring up to this ideal, whatever it may be. But what we're arguing for today is that from this perspective of wholeness and oneness, that being different is just part of this diverse tapestry of humanity, right? It's not a limitation or a deficiency. Wholeness is not defined by absence, right, of either physical or mental impairment, but by recognizing and honoring that inherent spiritual essence in each person. So individuals who are maybe perceived as disabled, we understand are simply complete human beings. There's not something missing, right? That's just how they showed up. Complete and interconnected beings who possess unique gifts and talents that contribute to the richness and the world. And they have their own purpose and journey to fulfill, as we do. And by embracing this perspective, we move away from a very narrow definition of wholeness, right, to a much broader and inclusive one. And one that can transcend those differences. And that is part of what the work that we are all called to do. To foster a society where every individual, regardless of how they have shown up on the planet, are valued and respected and given the opportunity to shine their light in the world. And when we do that, we honor our interconnectedness and our wholeness in that one spirit. So I will share briefly that when I was growing up, I was the kid who got a note from their teacher on their report card every year saying, needs to pay more attention. And what nobody knew, either my teachers or my parents, was that I went to school desperately every day trying to pay attention and could not understand why I couldn't. And as the daughter of a college professor, it was, for me in that moment, especially hard. My brother and my sister were always really good at everything at school, and I was not. And the only conclusion that I could draw as a child was that there was something wrong with me. I was so deeply ashamed that there was something wrong with me, deeply ashamed that I was somehow bringing shame on my parents. I desperately imagined every day walking to school how I could get sick so that I could go home, because school was just a place of humiliation for me. And it continued to feel like that most of my life. And, over the years, I kind of worked out some compensations and strategies to sort of get through, but it always felt like I was just hanging on by my fingernails. And it wasn't until recently, at a rather advanced adult age, that I got a diagnosis of inattentive ADHD. And the importance of that is not the diagnosis. So in the moment of receiving that diagnosis, it was an incredible relief, because now I could say there's not something wrong with my personality, there's not something wrong with my intentions or my desires. There is simply something different about the way my brain is wired. And that is why I am the way I am. But all of those years, it was a personal moral failing, not a difference. And, in our society, in the medical world now, in our society, we are learning more and more about neurodivergence all the time, right? We still have a long way to go, both to understand it, but even more importantly, to acknowledge it and make room for people who are not wired the same way. Because it's hard when you can't see it. And this was part of what happened in that story that I shared with you about Gus Waltz. When you look at him just standing there, you may not think, oh, he's a person with a disability, but he behaves differently. And at that point, people get scared because they don't understand it, right? So I shared this just to share both the idea that it's important to think about what we don't see, or not have expectations and assumptions. And that really goes back to this idea of sort of what is the status quo, what is the norm, what do we make room for, and what do we resist. So Ernest Holmes, this is a sort of longer quote, this is just part of it, but we'll get to kind of break it down in a sec. So positive thinking does not mean aggressiveness or use of willpower, but rather a dynamic, affirmative attitude toward life, the power and creativity that reside by nature in our thought and are directed through the process of prayer of faith, which is based in the conviction there must be wholeness back of everything. So here, constructive, affirmative thinking leads us to that wholeness, and faith in that wholeness is the key to the fruits of its action. And what all of these words are about is that to the degree that we recognize our wholeness, is that wholeness expressed in our lives, in every aspect of life. Now, I think we struggle a little in our teaching because we believe in the creative power of thought to reconcile things that do not appear to change, no matter how hard we're trying. And this is why that quote started with, positive thinking does not mean aggressiveness, because it is not about your willpower and thinking, I want this thing to change, right? Because it's about wholeness. When we know that spiritual wholeness, that wholeness expresses itself in our experience, which does not necessarily mean a miraculous change in our physical circumstances or our mental circumstances. What it means is that that wholeness is expressed in our lived experience, in our sense of living, in our sense of fulfillment, in our sense of meaning. And there may be changes that occur from a physical or mental standpoint. This is still part of the mystery of life that we don't fully understand. But what we do affirm in our teaching is that it is that connection with wholeness that is really the transformative element. So we believe that there are no accidents or mistakes in the grand tapestry of existence. However it is that you are born is not a mistake, however you look, whatever experience that is, right? the body, mind, spirit, and soul that every individual possesses are perfectly designed to fulfill their unique purpose in the world. And that's our journey. What is our purpose? And there may not be a single purpose, right? Our purpose evolves, our purpose changes. That's part because it all depends on not just who we are and the circumstances that we may be born into, but every single person that you encounter, every single choice that you make in life leads you in one direction or another, or yet another. And that is simply a continuous evolving process. And in our teaching, we do not believe that this has all been decided ahead of time. It is our journey to experience that and to make those choices, right? So I want to share briefly another story. Does anyone recognize this man? His name is Paul Alexander, and he is the person to live the longest amount of time in an iron lung. He just died this year. He was born in 1946, and at the age of 6, he contracted polio and was left a quadriplegic. And in those days, the treatment for people who suffered this experience was to be placed in an iron lung, which is a device that uses negative pressure to allow the lungs to expand and contract, because the person who has experienced this type of paralysis no longer has the muscle control to do that themselves. And for those mainly children who suffered polio and experienced the iron lung, their lifespan in this device was not that long. But this man, in fact, lived to be 78. And over time, he was able to develop some strength that allowed him to be outside of the lung from time to time. But he did spend most of his life, and this is a photograph of him in his law office, because he went on to go to college at UT Austin and to go to law school and to work in a law practice for a number of years. And he would meet his clients in his iron lung, in his office, which his brother commented in an interview was quite shocking to many people. They were not prepared for that, but he was quite competent. And I think I share this particular story because, of course, in the context of our norms and expectations, it's astonishing, right? And yet, that's kind of the point, is that we limit people so often by what we think is possible for them, right? And I'm not saying that to prove your value in life, you have to go to college or be a lawyer, but simply that any particular set of circumstances, there can be all kinds of ways to move beyond those limitations if you, A, and B, the people around you, are willing to look beyond those norms and expectations to think about what other possibilities might be available for that person. And he was fortunate to have such a family, and his brother tells a story of in order to motivate him to start doing the exercises needed to build some lung capacity, his parents promised him a puppy if he could stay out of the lung for 3 minutes at a time. And that was the motivation that he needed. All right. So that's part of that mystery of those experiences. He had the parents who were willing to do that. But he also made the choice, right? And that's those right turns and left turns in life. Yes, I will do that. No, I won't, right? I really love that story and his smile, right, in those circumstances. So, Yvonne Pierre, oops, oh, goodness, did we lose a slide here? Hold on a minute. Well, if it's not there, I guess we're missing one. I apologize. I will share this with you anyway. So when you focus on someone's disability, you'll overlook their abilities, beauty, and uniqueness. Once you learn to accept and love them for who they are, you subconsciously learn to love yourself unconditionally. So that's a really interesting connection. That was a quote from a woman named Yvonne Pierre, who wrote a memoir called The Day My Soul Cried, and she's a survivor of sexual abuse and assault. But that connection, right? Do we see ourselves as whole? And does that allow us to see others as whole? Or if we can see others as whole, can we see ourselves as whole? Right? They go together, don't they? And we'll talk about that as a spiritual practice in the moment. But part of why I wanted to share that quote is the idea of what our role and responsibility is. So we're all called individually to know ourselves as whole. And we're all called collectively to know each other as whole. But how do we actually do that? Do we do that in our spaces? Do we do that in our lives? Do we do that in our homes? Is your home wheelchair accessible? Can it accommodate people with different abilities? Is your workplace able to accommodate people with physical or mental or emotional disabilities? Is our center able to accommodate that? Does our bathroom accommodate that? Do we have a space where someone could go if they got overstimulated and needed to calm down? Do we have closed captioning on Zoom? I mean, there are so many different ways that we can think about that. But the point of that is to recognize that just as we would want all of those accommodations if something is going on with us, so must we be responsible to think about how that works for other people. By recognizing and valuing the abilities and contributions of people of all abilities, we can foster an environment of genuine inclusivity. And that is something I think that is really a profound and very important responsibility that we have as human beings. To recognize those needs and to be advocates for them. So it's not enough simply to see it, right? We're also called on to do. And I think that's really, really key. Because when we do that, we contribute to the transformation of our communities to be spaces of love, acceptance, and equality. And that goes for every kind of person, right? So I want to share one more story, and then we'll get to our spiritual practice for the week. So a shop owner placed a sign above his door that said, "Puppies for sale." You can see puppies are a theme today. Signs like this have a way of attracting kids, and no surprise, a little boy saw the sign and approached the owner. "How much are you going to sell the puppies for?" And the store owner said, "Oh, anywhere from $30 to $50. And the little boy pulled out some change from his pocket. "I have $2.37, he said. "I want to see the puppies." So the owner whistled, and a large dog came out, followed by 5 little bundles of fur. And the boy noticed that one of them appeared to be limping. And he said, "What's wrong with that little dog?" And the shop owner explained, "Oh, a vet looked at him, and there's something wrong with his hip socket. And so he's never going to be able to walk very well. He's always going to limp." And the boy became very excited and said, "That's the puppy I want." And the shop owner said, "Oh, no, you don't want to buy that dog. If you really want him, I'll just give him to you." No, the boy said, "I don't want you to give him to me. That little dog is worth every bit as much as the other dogs. I'll give you $2.37 now, and I'll pay you $50 every month. 50 cents every month till we get to the amount that, until I have him paid for." And the shop owner said, "Oh, you don't really want to buy that dog. He's never going to run and jump and play like the other puppies." And then to his surprise, to the shop owner's surprise, the little boy reached down and pulled up his pants leg. And the shop owner could see that he had a crippled leg, a twisted leg, in a metal brace. And the boy said, "Oh, that's all right." He said, "The puppy needs someone to understand him. I'll understand him." And, we can all we don't need to have twisted legs or braces to be the person who understands and is present with everybody exactly as they are, right? So the spiritual practice I want to invite you to engage in this week is learning to see with the eyes of wholeness. I was really impressed with, I don't know if any of you watched the Olympics a few weeks ago. Well, this week is the Paralympics. And they start in a couple of days. And this man, whose name is Max Stutzman, this is a photo of him at the Tokyo Paralympics. He is the world record holder in archery for anybody, abled or disabled. He's not simply the world record holder in the Paralympics in his event. He is the world record holder, period. And again, this is just about expectations, right? What we imagine is possible for people and what they can actually accomplish when they choose to and have the support at every level to do that. So this week, what I want to invite you to do is that when something happens in your physical body that is out of your control, how do you respond? Do you see yourself as broken? Do you blame yourself? Or do you still know your inherent wholeness? Just something to think about, right? Here's the second. Notice your first thought when you meet a person who has a disability. Do you automatically assume that their life is harder than yours? Do you pity them for the life that they lead? Do you assume that they must need extra support to live and navigate the world? And indeed they may, but you can't know, right? That's the problem with expectations and assumptions, right? So if you have these thoughts, begin to gently challenge them. And I invite you to talk to people to ask them what they need, right? Often what I have heard is that people simply want to be asked. They don't want people to assume what their needs are. They want to be asked because in that we offer respect, right? In asking the question. So this spiritual practice is to think about your own thoughts in relation to yourself, and then think about your own thoughts in relation to others, and think about what you can do about that. You know, and as we work through these shifts, I think, in our own thinking, our own assumptions, and the stereotypes that we've learned, right, we have the opportunity to remember that each one of us is a unique individual with a unique experience, and that we all deserve to be seen as whole, regardless of appearances. So in a bigger sense, we also have the opportunity in our community moving forward to think about how inclusive is our space? How inclusive are we as a community? That's not something to answer right here. I think at home we strive to do that, but like anywhere, we have opportunities for growth. And so hopefully that's something that we can continue to work on together, is to think about how we can make our physical space more inclusive and how we can make our online space more inclusive, because there are definitely things we can be doing. So, I hope this has been an opportunity today to think about things in new ways. That's kind of one of the things we love doing in our philosophy, isn't it? We want you to think about things in new ways, because it's when we get to that edge, right? When we get to that edge of growth, the edge of our ideas, the edge of our assumptions, the edge of our expectations, that's where growth really happens. And it's not, I can encourage you to think about things in a particular way, the way that I'm thinking about them, but I honor each and every one of you in navigating that path for yourselves. So I thank you for joining me today in this exploration of our wholeness, right? Our wholeness is all there is. And I want to invite you to stand and join me in an affirmation. And so we'll do it kind of that the three-way thing we like, we'll whisper it, we'll speak it, and then we'll shout it, okay? So today I recognize my wholeness and that of everyone I meet. Today I recognize my wholeness and that of everyone I meet. Today I recognize my wholeness and that of everyone I meet. Thank you.